had some leftover carriage house from the tasting room, and there, because we don't have the traffic right now, there was part of a bottle left, and so I cooked with it. And Hayley, I want you to appreciate, I'm wearing flowers and bright colors just for you.
I noticed that. I love it. I didn't wear flowers. I failed you. But Ringo is here, and he's wearing a bow tie for everyone. So.
All right. All right. So we've got some people here. We can welcome everybody officially to happy hour. Cheers. Cheers, guys. Nice to see everybody. Idris, we want to see your face, though. Nice. Gus is drinking Carriage House. Idris said he had Carriage House. Who else is drinking Carriage House? Hayley, good job.
Yeah. Gus.
Becky, perfect. Micah, what are you drinking?
So we chilled a bottle of Riesling for last week and then missed last week because I had to work instead, and so we're drinking.
Okay, well, Micah and we're drinking Riesling too, so you have company.
These are good.
But next week's our last week before harvest, so don't work next week. That would be poor choices.
Yep, we're going to Cope Bonneville next week.
So
in Cincinnati.
Good for you guys, Dave and Camille. We love to see everybody share. It's so fun to have everybody drinking the same wine. So the reds are harder food pairings for happy hour snacks sometimes. So Mom found this one. For those of you who did not make this, hi Letty, you're gonna want to make these. They are spectacular. They're super decadent. I don't really know that they're necessarily the middle of summer light and
no, but they're
super
really
good. They're so good. So
and it's pear season.
It is pear season.
So,
I have the pears that went into one of the batches of these that I made, like came right off the tree over to my house, turned into puffs for the same day, which was pretty awesome. So I've got a good friend who grows pears. It is pear season. Okay. So, Dad, do you want? It is also peach season. Which is here, Beth, and that sounds like a delicious bottle of wine that you're drinking. I'm just kind of jealous, except I have Carriage House, so I'm not. Dad.
Yes.
We can hear you. Are you ready to tell us what's going on in the vineyard?
I am. We have a three-part story today. So we'll start first of all with the Syrah vine. Last week it hadn't colored up as much, and so you can see the variation is progressing nicely. The size of the clusters is small compared to many Syrah vines. The crop load on the vine is not terribly heavy, and so this promises to be a really good year for Syrah as well. And if you look at the upper right portion of the picture, you see the delicate shoot end with the little leaves, and there's some tendrils. So that means the water status, in spite of 100-degree days over the weekend and high 90s before and after, we're looking after the water balance of that vine. It's being hydrated. Okay, ready to go to the cab. So the Cabernet clusters are showing themselves with deeper coloration. Cabernet is a varietal that colors up more rapidly but doesn't mature until later, and so it's deceptive, but at the same time, it seems like this is ahead of an average year. The berries are small, the clusters are small, and so what we've been thinking about as promising year for Cabernet continues just to tease us further. The brown on the shoots is, as we mentioned before, lignification. That's a hardening off for winter preparation. That's a sign that the vines are exactly where you want them to be. They've got enough hydration, and yet they're not overly stimulated to grow. But again, with the heat. And on both of these pictures, for those who haven't noticed it before, you see the nets that have been applied and tied underneath. And then the third part of our story today is from the WSU Ag Weather Net.
Did you want to see your helicopter picture?
Oh, sure, if you want.
Too. I thought it was cool.
Okay, so while I was up setting the water today and taking the pictures, the orchard next door has a helicopter that is spraying young apples in its very uneven terrain, and there are electric wires running across the blocks of apples. And so since our son is a helicopter pilot, I was impressed with the guy's airmanship, working up and down over these obstacles and getting the spray applied. With downdraft from the helo versus a spray plane, it does a lot more concentration of whatever they're putting on. I don't even know what it was. They gave us a heads up beforehand so that our ladies wouldn't be working in that area. But I had a prime seat up there by the pump while I was waiting for the water to balance, and I couldn't resist taking the picture.
Are you sure that isn't Micah flying in for some carriage out?
Oh yeah. Micah's got a little time in the seat of a helicopter too. So yeah, there you go.
So I thought you'd appreciate that, Micah. I wanted to make sure you didn't get left out.
I didn't think that was coming, but I'm glad. Oh, the other thing you'll notice is for those of you that haven't been to an orchard at this time of year, plastic reflective sheets are put down between the rows of trees, and then on the edges of those, they're held with shovels of dirt so they don't fly away. And their task is to reflect the sun on the lower hanging fruit so that you get a more even ripening all the way down from top to bottom. And yes, it's labor intensive. Yes, it's expensive, but the apple quality is definitely increased. And with the increase in the automated packing systems, including that this orchard has installed, that Adrish got to visit in 2 different locations last year, it's a real impressive enterprise when you're growing a top quality orchard and processing it with incredible technology of non-invasive assessment of the fruit with ultraviolet light going through and stuff. So it's incredible what the apple industry is doing now.
Yeah. All right, you ready to go to Ag Weather Net?
I am ready.
There you go.
Okay, so you see in the upper left, Washington State University, and this is a project that they have tackled by putting weather stations in agricultural sites. They have about 500 of them scattered across the entire state of Washington for all different crops. And what we're seeing here are the growing degree days that apply for vineyards. And there's a range of heat units that occur above 50 degrees Fahrenheit that you total each day. And then it's plotted on a curve for the growing season. So the top line that you see is a hot year, I believe it's 2015. And the bottom line you see is from the cold year, 2011. Then there are 2 lines in the center, and the black line is the average of 20 years worth of heat unit patterns. And the partial line that you see virtually overlying that is 2020. And so while it says we're having an average year, I would have to go back to something that's not even on the chart, and that is the spring and how much moisture we had. 2019, we had gigantic amounts of water in the soil for months that impacted the vines all over the state. This year we had a dry spring, and so people are looking at smaller clusters, smaller berries, high intensity fruit. And just to restate, we are really excited about this year, offering a promise of spectacular Cabernet Sauvignon, especially Syrah, as I mentioned, looks like it's going to follow the same thing. But the Cab has been just stunning as the year goes through. One of our customer wineries was out a couple of days ago, and the winemaker commented on the size of the berries in the clusters, and she was licking her chops about the fruit that they're going to be getting. So stay tuned. Even though we're going to be off happy hour during harvest, we will give you a summary in November.
Yep. All righty.
Any questions?
We are going to keep following our Cab Vine on Instagram, which is adjacent to the Cab Vine we've been following here every week and my plan is on Fridays to keep following the Cab Vine until we pick it, and then follow it in the winery at least until we're done with fermentation. And then it doesn't get as exciting when it's to follow every week when it's sitting in barrels. So then the time frame really changes. But we will keep you posted with that Cab Vine as we go. Tony, Tony asks, is the spring moisture and summer heat indicative of Walla Walla as well as Yakima? Heat units tend to go up and down together. They're different, obviously, there than here. They get more moisture than we do. So I think when George, our geologist, spoke, he had a slide of how much precipitation we get in different parts of the state. And the Yakima Valley is really in that donut hole of super dry, not a lot of, there's really not a lot of moisture in the Yakima Valley and up on the Wahluke Slope. And then everywhere else they get, as you go outwards, you get a little more moisture. And Walla Walla, because it's up against the Blue Mountains, when the water comes off the ocean, hits the Cascades, rain, snow, and then there's no reason. So we get white fluffy clouds on occasion. And then it hits the Blue Mountains, and as those clouds have to go back up again, the moisture falls out. And so they, even if they're having a drier year than normal, they'll have more moisture than we do. So they're kind of analogous, but they're not the same.
I might say
the other thing that's critical is the terroir in Walla Walla versus the terroir in the Yakima Valley, where we have these hillsides that have been washed away and much rockier, where they have accumulated, in some places, 150 feet of loess, which is moisture holding capacity, and they have a clay presence from other events geologically that we haven't got. So the terroir is a big difference in when you have less water but more moisture holding capacity. It creates a different scenario for the vines, Yakima Valley versus Walla Walla Valley.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, on that ag weather nut station, that is very close to our vineyard, so it's really accurate for us in our location. You can tune into the ag weather nut station close to the vineyards that you're looking at, but that one's really indicative of for our vineyard.
Okay.
All right. Any other great questions before we travel from our soils to the other part of the world? Because I think I've been answering them in the chat as we go. So I mentioned our geology discussion that we had a couple of weeks, months, I forget when. It's COVID, who knows what day it is, let alone when we had what discussion. So if you missed that, because there's a bunch of people on here who I think missed that one, you can go back to the YouTube and rewatch it. It was really interesting. We had a geologist come talk about how this area was formed, and the Cliff Notes version, which, as I talked about, we have these mountain ranges that were up thrust. We also had a hot spot that spewed lava out at the Oregon, Idaho, Washington border. So all of Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon and Western Idaho are covered in, there's like 14,000 feet worth of basalt here. it's so heavy it actually dented the crust of the earth, and then it got pushed up. And Walla Walla, as Dad mentioned, has a lot more influence of the Missoula floods. Our vineyard is above that, but especially on our hillside vines, we have a lot. The volcanic soils are a huge influence in our soil profile. And one of our other happy hour speakers, Brad Silly, who's leading our Rhone trip. And Beth, if you're drinking Gigondas, I hope to see you drinking Gigondas with me in the Rhone next summer, because we're gonna have fun with that. But I think the connection, we said we wanted to go travel again. We wanted to go to Italy. And I said, I know exactly who to talk to us about Italian wines, because my good friend Hayley, who decided to join us today, is an Italian wine specialist. She has spent a ton of time in Italy, traveling around, working. She's done some harvest work in some different places, and knows a lot about Italian wines. So we decided to theme our volcanic wines with Italian volcanic wines that you maybe haven't heard of. And I'm going to let Hayley teach everybody all sorts of things about Italian wine. And we need to meet your puppy, because she's got a new puppy who's friggin' adorable.
So this is Ringo. He's a little corgi. He's 14 weeks tomorrow. Graduating from puppy kindergarten tonight. So he has his bow tie on for you guys. Yeah, he's learning lots about wine right now.
Fantastic. Love it.
But since I'm grounded, I had time to get a puppy, which is rare. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to, be drinking Carriage House, because it's one of my favorite wines, and to get to talk to everyone a little bit about some of the volcanic soils and wines that we find in Italy. It's funny because there's so many differences when you go, comparatively speaking, all over the world, right? But there's some things that kind of connect us in this beautiful way. And that's one of the things that I love about the wine world. So if I were to talk about all of the volcanic soils in Italy, we would probably be here till next week, and Carrie would be like in the middle of harvest. So
No, we're not that close yet.
Okay.
We're not that
so I just picked 3. Yeah. I picked 3 areas. One that you probably are familiar with, and then 2 that are a little bit lesser known or maybe looked at in a different way. And I really love maps. You can probably tell by the maps that wallpaper my office. But it also helps me in understanding kind of where we are and what we're talking about. So I have some slides to kind of show you and give you an idea of what I'm talking about comparatively. And I'll try to be short and sweet and as detailed as you want, and as many nuts and bolts as you guys want if you have questions. But I also like to talk about what you get in the glass, right? Because we're all here because we love drinking wine. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Yeah, so I'm gonna see here, and I do have sharing power. Look at that.
Yes, you do. You have all the power.
I love power. So I'm gonna start here. Can you see my screen? Okay, so I'm actually gonna start here. So when I'm talking about, this is a map, actually the Soave Consortio, we're gonna talk about Soave last, but the Soave Consortio made this, which is really great. And it just to give you an idea of the complexities of volcanic influence in Italy alone, and how many different regions throughout the country have this huge influence of soils and complexities. It's all the way from Soave to Sicily. So all the way from up here in the Veneto down to the little island that the boot's kicking. And it's just a beautiful thing. Italy's so beautifully complicated. You have 20 different regions. Each region acts as its own country. And then all of the rules and regulations on top of that can make it intimidating. It can make it really exciting. And I hope that some of this will get you excited about some of these areas, or more excited about them. So what I'm going to talk about first is kind of what all volcanic wines share, because you guys, most of you are drinking Carriage House right now, and you learned a lot about Washington and how volcanic soils influenced a few happy hours ago. And I think it's important to talk about how it kind of translates to what's in the glass. So the first thing that I kind of always like to talk about is it always provides this kind of mouth-watering quality, high acid, high acidity, and then this kind of saltiness. And a lot of this is because of the nutrients that you get in the soil. And I put something in here for Carrie because I know it's our favorite conversation to have. So this pleasant bitterness, again, from these mineral salts. And then this kind of almost savory character. So I always talk about it like like you get fruit character in the red wines or the white wines, but also these non-fruity flavor herbal notes, which some people attribute or use the word minerality.
You're killing me. You're killing me.
I know. So me and Carrie have had this argument back and forth, but I always kind of go to when people use this term, that's where I go when people say that. And there's this ongoing debate and argument, and there's all of these things. But instead of using the term minerality, I like to use this kind of savoriness quality in the glass. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Carrie, before I move on.
Okay, my thoughts on minerality are very formed by the fact that a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, started to do his master's thesis while we were at Davis on minerality. And he spent a year trying to get students who participated in a lot of panels and were very well trained in wine and wine verbiage and how to talk about wine. And but he could not get a consensus for what it means. And so I really don't like the concept that when people say this thing causes that thing, when you can't even define the thing, I think it makes no sense to say you get this type of soil causes minerality when Robin talks about minerality, she means one thing. When Camille talks about minerality, she's referring to something else. When, somebody else uses minerality, they mean a completely different thing. And so I think it's hard enough to describe what you're talking about with wine. Minerality is a word that I never use personally because it causes so much confusion, and I know that everybody's going to interpret what I'm saying differently. So I never use it. And I never, ever, ever do attribution of this causes minerality, because if I don't know how you're using it, then I can't make an attribution that something caused it. So I like savory. We can use savory.
Yeah, and I think that's why, the term minerality is used for volcanic wines a lot. And that's why I kind of defined, at least my understanding, and I think most people, experts in the world, can agree the savory character comes from volcanic soils. But I think the thing that's most interesting, depending on no matter where you are in the world, is this dimension and density. So it's been defined as this kind of weightless gravity alongside intensity on the palate. So you have these intense flavors of whatever it is in the glass, but it also just feels weightless on the palate. And it comes from the extract rather than the actual structure of the wine, so the acid or the tannin. And then maybe this gritty, salty, hard, textural flavor on the palate too. So that's kind of what we all have in common, no matter where we are and what the grape varietal is. But what makes it really interesting and why we're talking about it today is what makes it complex. And there's so many different things. You talk about why and the type of the basalt that you have in Washington State. And, it's not just the Columbia River basalts, but also you have this influence from the Cascade volcanic arc being formed. So that creates all these complexities. With volcanic soil, you have types of volcanoes. You have the different lavas that they provide, and then the different eruptions, which create different lava flows and create all of these different complexities in the soil. I'm no geologist. I'm not going to go into that detail, but just to give you an idea of why it can be so different, even from, just same country, same region. So we're going to start in Sicily. So we're going to start south and work our way north, because I feel like the majority of the time when we're talking about Italy, we're focusing on the north. And I feel like that's probably more of a familiar area for a lot of people. So we'll start in Sicily. And when we talk about volcanic soil in Italy or volcanic wines of Italy, one of the what's hot topics areas right now is Mount Etna or Etna Rosso. So when you look at Sicily, you have this large island here, and then you have Mount Etna here in northeast Sicily. And Nero d'Avola is the grape of Sicily. It grows everywhere on the island except for on this beautiful little volcano right here. And this is a picture of all of the different lava flows. So to give you an idea of Mount Etna, it's a stratovolcano. So it started at sea level, and then over about 600,000 years, it has slowly grown up to about 12,000 feet above elevation. And it's still active, it's constantly erupting. It's an effusive volcano, which means that it's not explosive and completely destroys everything in its path like Mount Vesuvius did for Pompeii in Italy, but rather it's just slowly puttering along. It does have larger eruptions that have devastated areas on Etna, but for the most part, it's business as usual, and you're sitting there drinking your coffee or having a glass of wine and looking at the steam coming from the top. But what's really interesting about it, since you have these constant lava flows over time and it's still happening, you have these different ages of volcanic soil, and it becomes more compact over time throughout the growing area for these wines. So what they've done, and really it hasn't become a relevant topic. There was only about 3 major producers in the 80s and now it's kind of this booming area because people have realized the expressive terroir that is shown. So you're seeing this huge growth and interest in the wines from there. It's phylloxera free. It's old vines. There's some vines still from the 19th century. It's virtually kind of untouched. When you go there, it's kind of this area that has been untouched by time. But this kind of just shows you the different volcanic types and then the different age of the lava flows, which is pretty interesting. So the grape there, this is some pictures that I took. There's me walking one of the terrace, and then this is the actual soil here from one of the contrada. And Nerello Mascalese is the main red grape, and Caracante is the main white grape, grown anywhere from about 400 feet above sea level up to about 11,000 feet. So the DOC is very specific to what's grown there, but you have a lot of grape growing kind of around this conical volcano, which is really interesting. And Nerello Mascalese is almost comparatively speaking similar to Pinot Noir in that it's very good at showcasing terroir from one meter to another meter. And that's why I kind of wine aficionados and also wine lovers are really interested in these wines, because you can taste a wine from one winery or one vineyard site and then taste another wine with the same grape, 100% Nerello Mascalese, that's maybe 10 feet away, and it's completely different. And it could be because of the soil or lava flow of that area, which is really, really interesting. You see these terraced vineyards, and it's really because it's a high sand content, a lot of ash, and very loose soil. So they terrace the vineyards so you don't see a lot of erosion of the vineyards. And these are some producers that are very well known that I really, really like. I always just like to give people some guidance. There's tons of other great producers. Tenuta Tenere has here their pre-phylloxera vineyard wine. The Contrada on the label, when it has the Contrada listed, it's generally more expensive because it's essentially a single vineyard. Contrada is just that specific village or vineyard site. So almost like a Grand Cru from Burgundy, if you're thinking. And then, Caracante is also, if you like high acid whites, this is right up your alley. And that's very rare for Southern Italy, right? But you're at high elevation, and the grape variety itself is actually very typical of providing that. So I see a lot of stuff popping up in the chat box, so I don't know. Stop me if I need to, or I can keep going too.
Well, we were just talking about phylloxera, and because you mentioned that there's ungrafted vines there. And so we were talking about how phylloxera travels well when you have a lot of clay or a lot of soil, because what happens is when the soil gets moist, it swells, and then when it dries out again, you get cracks in the soil. And because sandy soils just dry out and turn into sand, and volcanic soils don't have a lot of water holding capacity, they're just rocks, so they don't crack. Phylloxera can't travel and they can't move. So it is there are pockets like this around the globe. They're very hard to find, but even though they found phylloxera in Walla Walla and all over the state last fall, we had people come out and look in our vineyard, and because of the significant percentage of basalt in our soil profile, I think we haven't found any phylloxera in our vineyard yet. Because even if you get it, it stays in one place and it can't travel. And so it's, as we've said all along, our grapes are really good at social distancing. So they are set for 2020.
Well, phylloxera has always been in the Yakima Valley, but it tends to be down more in the valley where you see more Concords. I've always heard it was here. It doesn't seem to do anything to Concords, or I've never heard that it affects any crops down here in the valley. But it does not seem to be on our hillsides vines, and where most of the Yakima Valley grapes are grown now are on the hillsides. So it does not seem to be a problem in Yakima. Like I said, Carrie said, they did find it in Walla Walla, but they tend to be in heavier soils down there. So, I mean, it remains to be seen what happens, but that seems to be around the world what the status is.
Yep. And then, well, I'm going to comment on both Adrish and Tony's questions that the bottle that says pre-phylloxera is, what that means is that those vines were planted, I mean, Hayley, correct me if I'm wrong, but those vines were planted before phylloxera, so they're really old. The wines that I made in Australia, we had some pre-phylloxera vines that went back to the 1860s, which means that they weren't wiped out when everything else was in Europe. And yeah, that is a big selling point, because when you have 150-year-old vines, that's really cool. They do have intensity. They do taste different. Those vines are really mature. It's that's a really cool special thing. And
well, it's also it's the truest expression of that terroir, because there's no influence from the rootstock, which would be different than the wood itself. So if you're really looking for the holy grail of wine, the essence of that spot and the world that it grows,
ungrafted old vines are where you want to look.
Yep.
Which is why we love the fact that you guys, a couple of you, are drinking Riesling, because those are the oldest vines on our property. And they, so that's great. We love that you're drinking old vines, ungrafted, even here. And so if you do have phylloxera, what happens is your vines don't get to live that long. They start, the productivity of your vines go down. You don't get the yield. They attack the roots and they eat the roots. And so your vine slowly dies. So you have to take them out and plant onto grafted rootstock. So.
And Tony's question, where Washington needs to start grafting, they do in Walla Walla, because it has been found there. And what those growers will be doing is taking out parts of their vineyards and replanting in sections. It doesn't sort of happen all at once, but they will be replanting if you have phylloxera. Like I said, we don't have it here in the Yakima Valley, as far as I know. So
yeah, they found it here too.
Well, it's here, but it's not in the wine grapes. It's always been here, like I say, in the valley, but it never seems to be up on the hillsides.
Yeah. So, and that's one of those. I mean, that's one of those things that makes volcanic soils magical. So,
absolutely.
All right, Hayley.
All right, we'll go to Campania now. So,
are you going to show us where Campania is? Because I don't know that everybody knows.
I will. So I have a map here. So most people have heard of Pompeii, Mount Vesuvius, Bay of Naples. This is Campania. And the first time I ever went to Italy, I went to Naples, and I thought that's what Italy was like. And just like an idea of what Naples is like. My best way to describe it is this controlled chaos. And when I say that, like, I walked out of the airport and there was a scooter with 5 humans on a little Vespa, and it was a mom, a dad, the kid smashed between, dog on the handlebars, and that was like not like one, many, and zooming around. There's no rules of the road. It's madness, but it all works in this crazy way. But not all of Italy is like that. But Naples has this like very special kind of like nitty gritty, just beauty to it. And it also has Campania, the region as a whole, is if we're talking about volcanic influence in Italy, really we can't not talk about Campania. And we could spend an entire day talking about Campania, because from every edge of that entire region, it has volcanic influence. This is because of Vesuvio. This is because of the Campi Flegrei, which is still active. Vesuvio is technically still active as well. Rocca Monafina to the north is no longer active, but you have huge influence of 1 extinct and 2 active volcanoes, and then an active volcano from the past over time. So you have a lot of basalt, you have a lot of tufo, which is ash influence as far as volcanic soils go, and it's all over the region. And when you think of southern Italy, a lot of times people just associate, cheap, cheerful wines, which is the case, or bulk production, even to a certain degree. And this was because a lot of producers planted to make money, whether it was after the World Wars or with industrialization in the 80s. And, a lot of bulk production happened. And in southern Italy, it was warm. There was some flat land. It's easy to grow grapes. It's easy to make cheap wine. But Campania is one of those regions that has always really kind of stayed in this premium wine category. And also it's one of those regions that we don't talk a lot about when we talk about Italy. When I think of some of the best meals that I've had in Italy, it was when I was in Campania and Naples. Fresh seafood. You think about tomatoes are grown there, bufala mozzarella, all of these amazing things. And then some of these beautiful wines that we just don't talk about or hear about very often. So this is a kind of a map to show you the growing regions for wine grapes in Campania. And to give you a good idea, one of probably the most important areas is Avellino. And that's where you find Torrassi, which is made with Aglianico, which is referred to as the Barolo of the South. So, Carrie, Piemonte is her second home. So I'm sure, there's a lot of Barolo in your cellar, and you probably drink a lot of Barolo. And when I think of some of these wines that really stand out and age to the test of time, Torrassi is one of these wines, and it's very, very beautiful. You have white grapes, the white grape Fiano, and then another white grape, Greco de Tufo, from the town of Tufo, but it actually speaks to that Tufo content in the soil. And then in the north, you have more Aglianico and another grape called Piroso. But it's really interesting because you have these grape varietals that often you don't see, or maybe you have, but we don't talk about. And some of the most ageable wines, some of Italy's 2 greatest white wines, Greco de Tufo and Fiano, and one of Italy's top red wines that are grown in this region that we just don't talk about often. So this is just some facts. I just talked about all of this, but talking about Mount Vesuvius and its influence on the area, the Campi Flegrei is one of the ones that often doesn't get talked about. And it's really this highly active volcanic area that's actually 5 volcanic lakes, and all of these volcanic cones that have been active for nearly 40,000 years. So you talk about all of the ash influence again, and then this basalt influence in the soil. You get a lot of that from Campania. And then Rocca Monafina in the north is in the most northern part of Campania, and it's near the province of Caserta. And have anyone ever seen the Italian sparkling water Forelli? It's the green bottles with the red label. A lot of times you can associate that sparkling water. That's the volcano that actually provides the sparkle to that naturally carbonated wine or water from Italy, which is kind of cool. But they also grow grapes there, which is interesting, just not very much. So these are some vineyards that you find in Campania. And I think what's really interesting about when I went to Mastro Bernardino, and this is a great producer, this is a producer we have to thank for a lot of these indigenous varietals being around in these wines, is Mastro Bernardino, is the vine training. And then again, some of these old vines. So it's interesting because it's this kind of old style pergola, which essentially you have the shoots that grow and they're generally attached to nearby trees or old chestnut posts. So again, you kind of think of this like old wine culture that's still happening today, and kind of this like really embracing these native varietals that a lot of times we haven't heard of or we don't talk about. But they have, again, some vineyards there too that are, again, pre-phylloxera vineyards, so very, very old vineyards from the 19th century. There's one actually they call the Collio de Lapio, which is like the Vecchia de Lapio, which is the like ancient mother vine, and it's like a 200-year-old vine that looks like this, but it's like a 3-meter diameter trunk, which is wild. Just when you think about the vineyards that we normally see, and you're looking and you're like, how are they growing grapes like this? But
it's interesting, Hayley, before you go on from there, that vine that you're pointing at, the pergola, kind of the pergola thing, well, yeah, that's a little bit the trellising system they use for raisins in California, because it's easier to harvest raisins when they dry on the vine and they pick them afterwards. But at Davis, they have a grapevine that's planted like that. It's one of the oldest vines at Davis, and it's the mission grape. So the that trellising system got brought over to the U.S. when grapevines came over with all the missionaries, and they especially went to the West Coast, and we're starting to establish missions in California. That was one of, and probably down into South America, Latin America as well. That was one of the training methods that they brought over.
Super interesting. Yeah, I saw it in Umbria a lot too, and it's just in little pockets. It's referred to as like maritata, which is like married, because it kind of marries itself to the trees or whatever is nearby, like a vine would do. But really, really beautiful vineyards. Kind of the less chaotic of Naples and Campania. So these are some really great producers for some of the wines that I was talking about. They're a little, since I talked about a handful of wines, this is Mastro Bernardino Radici Fiano de Avellino, kind of benchmark Fiano. And like I said, a producer that we have really to thank for the survival of a lot of these indigenous grapes and vineyards in Campania today. Gallardi is a producer that's actually on Rocca Monofina, which is not very common. You don't see very many today. That just makes this one wine, Terra de Lavoro. It's an Aglianico Piedroso blend, and they only make about 1,000 bottles. So it's a little bit pricier, but it's a beautiful expression of what Aglianico can do. And then Torasi Molettieri is a very benchmark classic producer of the area. And one of my personal favorites is Benito Ferraro Greco de Tufo. So this is just a picture of their bottles as well. I'm a very visual label person, so I figured I'd throw them up there for you. All right, so last we're gonna talk about Soave. And I love Soave. And when I say I love Soave, I love specific Soave wines that are made with very thoughtful intention. And there's actually a lot more than most people think. I think when people think of Soave, they think of kind of that bulk produced, boring, uninteresting, you could call it like wine water, whatever it is, you know, there is a lot of that out there. But there's a lot of beautiful, beautiful Soave wines. And there's a huge volcanic influence. And it would be really interesting, you had a geologist on your happy hour with you, because I feel like you actually need a geologist when you're in Soave Classico, because it's this crazy mix of limestone and basalt, which is super, super rare. You don't find that combination of soil types together in many places of the world. And there's no like direct line. Like it's not, here's the limestone, right? And that's usually the case with vineyards, but it's very, very specific to different hillside vineyards in Soave Classico. So it's really, really interesting. And Garganega is the grape variety that you find here. You also find another grape called Trebbiano de Soave, and a little bit of Chardonnay planted as well. But really, Garganega is the grape variety of Soave. And when I think of Soave, and when you're looking for kind of, okay, if I go to the wine shop or I go online and I'm looking for a Soave, how do I know if it's good? How do I know if it's interesting? It is one of those regions where when it says Classico on the label, you're probably going to get a better Soave. And that's not always the case in Italy, but Soave Classico is hillside vineyards. So you have lower yields and you just have a little bit more intention in your winemaking there. But I think what's really, really interesting is just this combination of limestone and basalt in the soils. They actually have delineated Soave Classico into 32 different like cru areas, kind of like they did in Barolo with Megas, just because the patches of soil are so different in the Classico region. And when we're talking about that, I kind of have a picture here from the consortio that shows you these different soil types. And this is just in Soave Classico. But if you see the volcanic soil influence here and all of the basalt, it's very, very, very large and very, very mixed with alluvial soil and then limestone as well. I think it's kind of, you can kind of define it by west and east or central in Soave to a certain degree, but this gives you a picture of kind of those basalt rocks that you'll find in the Soave vineyards. This producer, I always talk about, I have to talk about it because I love the wines and I've always loved the Soave producer, but also this is one of the wines that the importer I work for imports. So, but Suavia is an amazing producer that shows a cru of Soave and also shows the different soil types and the two different varietals that you find. So the Monte Cabanare is 100% Garganega planted on 100% basalt. And then on the other side of the vineyard, you have more limestone rich soils and it's 100% Trebbiano de Soave. So they show your two varietals on the two different soil types on the cru hillside vineyard of Soave Classico, which is pretty cool. And again, if you really like these kind of high acid, beautifully long, rich style wines, like, I don't know, Riesling lovers, these are great wines to try. So that's kind of what I have. That's my spiel for Italian volcanic soil and wines.
Well, I think that's actually the Soave bit is really interesting from the standpoint that because the ancient Columbia River used to go through over our vineyard, we have that interesting mix of limestone and basalt as well. And so I'm going to have to go back and check out some Soave myself now.
Totally. I can stock you up too.
Perfect. I have a bottle of wine from Jesi, which is in Modena, in my fridge right now, which as much as you might like the food in Campania, I'm going to say next time everybody goes to Italy, go eat in Modena. Or Modena is according to Italy, it is the culinary capital of Italy. So I have not gone specifically to Campania to eat, but I can recommend pretty much anywhere in Modena. So, Hayley, Sue wants to know where is Soave on the Italian map? And then Paul has a good question about where to find that wine, but we have people all over the country. Where do they find these wines? How do they get them?
So the biggest thing that I would say is, I don't know if my email was on the email. You can reach out to me and I can find retailers near you. But if there's not, you can also always take a picture of if you have a wine shop that you go to, take a picture of the label and say, can I get this wine? And they'll ask their distributor to bring in a bottle for you. Wine shops are really great about doing that. Wine.com has the Suavia wines too, if you want someone to ship to you. But and I can also help kind of find some of the wines. A lot of the wines I don't personally represent. I just shared, I'm an equal Italian wine opportunity drinker, wine drinker as a whole, as I have Carriage House on my desk. But yeah, so first thing I would say is if you have a wine shop that you love, show them pictures of stuff because they'll try to track it down for you and bring it in for you. And it also helps the producers, right? But if they don't, or you don't have a wine shop, I can help kind of find and direct you because there's a lot of online retailers that are really great that will ship directly to you too.
Yeah, and I did not put Hayley's contact info in the email, but if you have questions, if you want to get a hold of her later, I can connect you. So just send us a note and
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah. And then can you point out Suave again on a map?
Oh, yeah. So you're in the Veneto. So Verona, Romeo and Juliet. And let's see, did I not put it on? I didn't. So you're Northeast Italy. I'm gonna pull it up here. Hold on.
Great, because in Verona they have well, not this year, but when we can get back to Verona, they have one of the second largest amphitheaters. There was the Colosseum where they did all the stuff in Rome, and then the second largest amphitheater in the country, I think, is in Verona, and they still do opera in Verona on, like, every summer they have a huge opera season, and I went with a friend of mine, and we didn't know that you were supposed to bring, we didn't think about the fact you were supposed to bring a cushion, so we're sitting on these 2,000-year-old stone seats for the duration of the opera, but Pavarotti was there. It was amazing. It was really, really cool. So, yeah, I spent the 4th of July when I was like 18 in the Veneto. There's so many cool areas to go visit around there. So we'll have to go back for one of our happy hour trips. After we go to France, maybe we'll have to go to Veneto and Hayley can lead us on an Italian wine tour. There we go. Take us to Suave.
Verona is actually where I took my courses for Italian wine. So I spend a lot of time in Verona. It's one of my favorite cities in Italy. It's kind of like a mini Rome in a way. I don't know. It won't let me share my Internet Explorer. I could just because I'm like not Zoom smart, but.
Here, wait, let me pull mine up and then, oh wait, let me pull mine up. Wait, what do you want me to go to? Just like Google Maps?
Yeah, I just searched Veneto, Italy in images, so it shows you the region in the region. I guess I could show it on my map back here too, but.
Hold on. Veneto, Italy. Okay.
And then you just share it, I thought, on Zoom, but obviously.
Here. I got it. You want me to zoom in? Where are we going?
Yeah, so maybe zoom out so they can see.
That's Verona.
Yeah, so this is where we're at in Italy. You got the boot. My home away from home in Turin. Barolo and Barbaresco are down here, which is where I found the Carriage House in the bar in Italy, which was completely surprising, but super awesome. And then a couple hours by train is the Veneto. And if we zoom in, where am I going for Suave exactly?
So in the Veneto, you have obviously Venice, people know of, but Verona right here, and Suave, Classico, and Valpolicella are just surrounding Verona. So there are these vineyards that are just literally.
Oh, is it by Lake Garda?
Yeah, this is Garda.
So
yeah, so you have Lugana right by Lake Garda, the south, and then you just go east a bit, and those are your Suave Classico vineyards. So it's just north there. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember where Lugano is. Down here?
Yeah, and Lugano is an interesting denomination because it actually covers Lombardia and the Veneto. Most of the production's in Lombardia, but you can make Lugano in both of those areas because it's all this denomination just south of Lake Garda, which is a beautiful, beautiful lake to go to.
It's
It
beautiful.
is a beautiful lake. That is
And you, when you take the train from Piemonte to the Veneto, you kind of go along the lake, which is really pretty.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. It is a beautiful place. So, all right, let me grab the chat back and see if we have any other questions. Hayley put her email in the chat if you guys want to be able to find her later. And let me see. I think we answered everything. So, oh, Paul, where do you find Amarone?
In the Veneto as well. So just right outside of Verona, you have Soave Classico, and then you have Valpolicella Classico, and they make Amarone and Valpolicella Classico. So they're just neighboring.
It's Valpolicella, right?
Actually, let's see here. I can pull up a map that has everything on it. So let's see. I can share because it's not Google. And I will show you.
And Amarone is an interesting way that they make wine because it's not just the grape, it's also the fact that they take the grapes and they dry them out, and then they pour the wine over the raisins again for more extraction of the fruit, it's really kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's very interesting winemaking. So they'll age it for up to 120, or dry out the grapes for up to 120 days. 100 days required before you can actually make the wine. So you're actually making wine from almost raisined grapes. But yeah, so this gives you an idea. So Verona here, and then Amarone is made in Valpolicella Classico right here. So, and then Soave is right here. So they're right next to each other.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. And I got to say, of all of the things that you guys are like, am I going to, when are you going to start making this? I'm putting Amarone up there with sparkling. It is, by the time harvest is done, I love harvest, but by the time it's done, I don't want to wait another 100 days to be still making wine. So there are things that are very worth letting other people put the effort into, and sparkling and traditional method sparkling and ripasso type winemaking are definitely in that list for me. So
also the grape varieties too, it's hard because you want certain air drying. Some people do air dry Cabernet and Merlot, but it doesn't have the same flavor profiles like Corvina with its skin type and how it dries. So sometimes it can be not exactly what you expect, and you'd probably be in, and then you're in a different environment for drying altogether. That would be an interesting experiment. We could do a little batch just to see what happens.
Okay, well I'll give you some grapes. You can try it.
Okay, great. Science
for everyone. Yeah. All right, Hayley, do you have any wine club recommendations? Micah is in the Seattle area, so is there anybody locally that would have a way for more great wine to show up at their house? Although, Micah, we could just send you more Cote Bonneville. That could
totally
help too.
You know what's really one thing that's really great that's come out of all of this is a lot of the restaurants that are doing wine clubs now with wines that they bring in. So a lot of Italian restaurants like Bartalio, they're doing a COVID relief wine club where you actually call and talk to the sommelier and say, I want this price range, this is what I want, and she'll recommend and put together special stuff for you, which is really cool. There's a ton of restaurants too, retail as well, McCarthy and Shearing is a great wine shop in the local Seattle area to go in, and if you ask them for something, Dan or Jay will find it for you, which is awesome. But there's so many retailers and restaurants that are selling wine bottles at retail cost right now because they just can't have the same amount of people in, and so they can do it for takeout. But shoot me an email where you live by, and I can send you some wine shops because we have a lot of great ones depending on the neighborhood. Just shoot me an email and I can help you find them.
And we'll give Aaron a shout out again because apparently he's working. Aaron Snyderman comes to happy hour when he's not at work. So, but apparently he's working. But Metropolitan Grill especially for this crew. I
Yeah,
know
they have a wine.
Aaron, they've got a wine club, but as we said last week, if you've got wines, Aaron has said repeatedly that he is super happy to take care of everybody who's here. So so call the Met, ask for Aaron, and
Tell him you in the Coke Bonneville
tell
happy hour.
him we sent you, and he'll be thrilled to take care of you.
So Micah, did you ever, were you ever stationed in Gaeta?
Was I ever stationed in Gaeta? No.
No. Okay. So I know Richard's flown over Vesuvius and had some wine tasting in that area.
I have flown in Sicily, but not long enough to drink.
Okay. Oh, you were flying the mail, huh?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I have to run because I have to take Ringo to puppy kindergarten, but I'm so happy I got to share wine with you guys, and it was such a pleasure talking to you and seeing you, Carrie, and family. I miss you guys.
I know,
Yeah,
you need to come by and visit.
I will. I'm planning a trip soon. It'll be within the next month. We'll touch base.
We can, drinking in the vineyard is completely safe and COVID acceptable. So
Love it.
next week, you guys, is our last happy hour before harvest, because I don't know when we're starting, but soon. So next week, we're actually going to the Cote Bonneville estate, which was built by my great-great-grandfather. It's still a single-family home. Mom and Dad got married in the carriage house. So while this is relevant for both weeks, next week we're actually drinking Cote. And it's still a single-family home. So the people that live there are going to give us a virtual tour and talk about the home, which is going to be, I think it's going to be really cool. And we will see you. Oh, shoot, I forgot. We are famous, you guys. We made it in Good Fruit Grower. Check this out. This is their innovation and technology issue. And look at this. Virtual happy hour. We are famous. Famous to farmers. I mean, for what that's worth.
Yeah, that's worth a lot. Right.
So, all right. Well, with that, we hope you guys have a great week. We will see you next week.
Cheers.
Bye, guys. See you next week.